Nobunaga Oda had 3,000 soldiers and 6 hours to live. The man coming to kill him had 40,000. His name was Oda Nobunaga, and everyone in Japan thought they knew exactly what kind of man he was. His own retainers called him the Fool of Owari. He dressed like a commoner. He ate while walking. He sang in public. He ignored the formal protocols that defined what a warlord was supposed to be. His enemies had decided he was nothing, that he would be swept aside when a real army came. They were about to find out what kind of man he actually was. Imagawa Yoshimoto was not marching on Nobunaga. He was marching on Kyoto to take control of the shogunate, the nominal government of Japan. Nobunaga's small domain of Owari simply happened to be in the way. Imagawa's army was 40,000 strong. It had been building for months, drawing from multiple allied domains. It had experienced commanders who had fought dozens of campaigns across the Sengoku period. It had cavalry, arquebusiers, early firearms, and supply wagons enough for a sustained campaign. To reach Kyoto, Imagawa needed to pass through Owari. Military planners in his staff had allocated approximately 2 days for dealing with Nobunaga. Not because Nobunaga was a serious threat, he wasn't, but because every small domain had to be secured before the main advance continued. It was administrative work, a formality. Imagawa Yoshimoto had 500 men guarding his personal camp. He had 500 men because he had never needed more. Oda Nobunaga's situation in May 1560 was, by any rational military calculation, terminal. His domain of Owari was small, roughly the size of a modern Japanese prefecture. His available fighting force was at most 3,000 men. He had no powerful allies. His own clan had spent years in internal conflict. His father had died when he was 17, and he had spent the following decade fighting off challenges from within his own family. His generals advised him to negotiate, to send tribute to Imagawa, acknowledge his authority, and survive as a vassal. This was the sensible course. This is what any reasonable warlord would have done. Nobunaga called a council, listened to the advice, then dismissed everyone, put on his armor, ate a meal of rice balls standing up, performed a brief war dance from the No play Atsumori, the famous lines, "Life is brief, glory is endless," and walked out to his horse. He had decided to fight. Nobunaga could not win a conventional battle. He knew this. His commanders knew this. The mathematics of 3,000 versus 40,000, even with perfect tactics, did not resolve in his favor in an open field engagement. So he did not plan for an open field engagement. His scouts had been tracking the Imagawa column for days. He knew the route. He knew the pace. He knew that a column of 40,000 men moves slowly, strung out across miles of road, the vanguard hours ahead of the rear. And he knew one more thing that would only matter if the timing was right. The sky to the west was turning the color of iron. A storm was coming. A big one. Nobunaga waited. He needed one thing: to know exactly where Yoshimoto's personal camp would be when the storm hit. If his scouts could find it, the specific gorge, the specific hillside, the specific location where 40,000 men's commander was resting, then 3,000 samurai might be enough, aimed at exactly the right point. On the afternoon of June 12, 1560, Nobunaga's scouts returned with the information he had been waiting for. Imagawa Yoshimoto's personal camp was in a gorge called Okehazama, a narrow, wooded valley approximately 8 miles from Nobunaga's position. Yoshimoto was there with his 500-man personal guard, resting while the main column made camp further along the road. His immediate vicinity held perhaps 2,000 to 3,000 soldiers. To reach the gorge, Nobunaga's force would have to move fast, through unfamiliar terrain, in deteriorating weather. They would have to arrive before the Imagawa camp had time to reform into a defensive posture. They would have a window of perhaps 1 to 2 hours before the main Imagawa force, camped along the road ahead, could be recalled to respond. Nobunaga looked at the map his scouts had drawn. He looked at the sky. He ordered the advance. The storm that struck Okahazama that afternoon has been described in Japanese chronicles as one of the most violent summer storms in living memory. Lightning, thunder loud enough to drown out voices at 10 yards, rain so heavy that archers could not use their bows, the string wet, the fletching soaked. For the Imagawa camp, the storm was an inconvenience. They were sheltered in the gorge. They had food. The main campaign would resume when the weather cleared. Yoshimoto was reportedly playing a game of kamari, a traditional Japanese kickball, when his attendants suggested he move inside. For Nobunaga's force, moving through the rain at a jog toward the gorge, the storm was the entire plan. Every sound of their approach was covered. Every lookout in the Imagawa camp was sheltering from the rain rather than watching the tree line. The lightning made visibility intermittent, brief, blinding flashes followed by deep darkness. And the storm created something else, a psychological disturbance. Even experienced soldiers become less alert, less organized, more inward-focused in severe weather. The storm had already begun to fight for Nobunaga before his samurai drew their swords. Nobunaga's force emerged from the tree line at the edge of the gorge at the height of the storm. What happened in the first 90 seconds is documented in multiple accounts and is consistent across all of them. The Imagawa camp did not respond as a military unit. Some soldiers grabbed weapons, most ran. A few attempted to form up and fight, but without the organizational structure that a formed army depends on, individual acts of resistance were isolated and quickly overcome. The 500-man personal guard around Yoshimoto, professional warriors who, in formed positions with adequate warning, might have held, were caught in small clusters, separated by the gorge terrain, unable to coordinate. Nobunaga's samurai moved through them in teams of 3 and 4, using the narrow terrain that the gorge created to prevent the numerical advantage of the Imagawa force from being brought to bear. 3,000 men in a narrow gorge are not 3,000 men in an open field. In the gorge, you cannot deploy your numbers at once. The terrain constrains you to hundreds at a time. Nobunaga had studied the gorge. He had chosen this specific ground for exactly this reason. Yoshimoto heard the commotion and initially believed it was a drunken brawl among his own soldiers. This detail, documented in the Shinshokoki, the primary chronicle of Nobunaga's life, is the most important detail of the entire battle. The commander of 40,000 men, at the moment his camp was being overrun, thought the noise was his own men misbehaving. He was still issuing orders to his attendants to stop the disturbance when a samurai from Nobunaga's vanguard reached him. Imagawa Yoshimoto was dead within minutes of the attack beginning. He was 42 years old. He never understood what had happened. The effect was immediate and total. Medieval Japanese armies of the Sengoku period did not have the institutional structure of a modern military. Unit loyalty was personal, tied to the commanding lord, not to an abstract concept of state or army. When Yoshimoto died, the command structure of the entire 40,000-man force dissolved. Not retreated, not regrouped, dissolved. Soldiers who had never fired a weapon that day began walking home. The largest army assembled in eastern Japan that year ceased to exist as a fighting force within hours of its commander's death. Nobunaga returned to his castle before nightfall. Okehazama was not luck. The storm was luck, or timing, depending on your philosophy. The rest was design. 3 reasons explain why 3,000 men destroyed 40,000. First, Nobunaga attacked the system, not the army. An army of 40,000 is not a single entity. It is a command structure, a logistics chain, a communications network, and a mass of soldiers held together by the authority of one man at the center. Nobunaga did not try to fight the 40,000. He tried to reach the one. Every tactical decision, the route through the hills, the timing with the storm, the gorge selection, the speed of the advance, was in service of a single objective: put a sword within reach of Yoshimoto before anyone could stop him. He didn't win by fighting better. He won by identifying the one point where the entire enemy system was fragile and concentrating everything he had on that single point. Second, the environment is never neutral. British commanders at Isandlwana thought the terrain was background. Mongol commanders at Yehuling thought the winter was a problem to be managed. Nobunaga looked at a violent thunderstorm and saw a weapon. He did not wait for ideal conditions. He understood that conditions are never ideal. They are either working for you or against you. And the commander's job is to make the calculation go the right way. The storm neutralized Imagawa's numerical superiority in archers, eliminated early warning, degraded communication across the camp, and created the psychological disorientation that made a coherent defense impossible. Nobunaga didn't cause the storm. He was simply the only commander on that battlefield who understood what it meant. Third, the decision was rational, not reckless. This is the lesson that gets lost in every retelling of Okehazama. Nobunaga is remembered as audacious, as impulsive, as a gambler who got lucky. The evidence does not support this. He waited for specific intelligence before moving. He selected specific terrain that negated the enemy's advantage. He timed the attack to a specific weather window. He identified the specific vulnerability in a 40,000-man force, the isolated personal camp of the commander, and concentrated his entire available force against it. A 10% chance of winning by attacking the commander's camp was better than a 0% chance of winning by waiting for a fair fight. Nobunaga didn't win because he was reckless. He won because he calculated exactly how reckless was rational, and then committed fully to the answer. The battle at Okehazama lasted less than 2 hours. The war it ended had been building for years. With Yoshimoto dead and the Imagawa force scattered, the political map of central Japan shifted overnight. The domains that had been aligned with Imagawa, calculating their position in a Japan ruled from Kyoto by Imagawa power, suddenly had no calculation to make. The threat was gone. The road was open. Nobunaga did not march on Kyoto immediately. He spent the next decade consolidating Owari, building alliances, and methodically expanding his power base. He formed a strategic alliance with Tokugawa Ieyasu, a minor lord whose territory bordered his own, that would shape Japanese history for 2 centuries. He recruited aggressively, promoted on ability rather than birth, and continued to fight the way he had at Okehazama, using technology, terrain, and timing rather than the weight of numbers. By 1568, 8 years after Okehazama, Nobunaga entered Kyoto. By 1573, he had deposed the last Ashikaga shogun and effectively ended the governmental structure that had nominally ruled Japan for over 2 centuries. By 1582, he controlled roughly a third of Japan's provinces and was within reach of completing the unification that no warlord had achieved in over a century of civil war. He was assassinated that year by one of his own generals, Akechi Mitsuhide, in the coup known as the Incident at Honnoji. He died at 49. But here is what the assassination does not change: everything that followed it. The unification of Japan, completed by his general Toyotomi Hideyoshi, the Tokugawa shogunate that brought 250 years of peace, the Japan that entered the modern era as a unified nation. All of it traces back to one afternoon in a gorge in Owari, in a thunderstorm, when a 26-year-old man that everyone had already written off decided that a 10% chance was better than no chance, and acted on it with everything he had. Oda Nobunaga did not live to finish what he started at Okehazama. The man who did, Tokugawa Ieyasu, his old ally, once said of that day, "Nobunaga ground the rice. Hideyoshi baked the cake. I ate it." Ieyasu understood what Okehazama meant. It meant that Japan was possible. Everything else was just time. 3 videos, 3 continents, 3 commanders who attacked when everyone said, wait. The Mongols used winter. The Zulus used terrain. Nobunaga used a thunderstorm. Next, the Spanish thought they had won Mexico. Then 800 of them died in a lake in one night. The Aztecs called it La Noche Triste. The Spanish definitely did not. Subscribe. It's already waiting.